I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. On today's Freethought Matters, we're going to talk about a global revolution you've probably never heard of, how a deep-pocketed Christian movement is reshaping our society from within.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at ffrf.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Our guest today is the author Elle Hardy. She's an Australian-born freelance journalist and a writer whose new book is called Beyond Belief: How Pentecostal Christianity is Taking Over the World. It's a fascinating exposé of how Pentecostalism, a deep-pocketed, tech-savvy Christian movement, is reshaping our societies from within. Elle Hardy is a foreign correspondent whose writing has appeared in GQ, The Guardian, Lonely Planet, Foreign Policy, and Business Insider, and ABC Australia.
And Elle Hardy is joining us today all the way from London. Welcome to Freethought Matters, Elle.
Thank you for having me.
So Elle, as your book says, is it really possible for Pentecostal Christianity to take over the world?
Well, I argue that this is really becoming the dominant expression of Christianity in the world today. It is, a sort of a subsection of a denomination, but it's really where all of the energy in the movement is right now. Churches from, your most staid old cathedrals in Latin America, to churches, to Methodist churches here in London are all trying to Pentecostalize because they can't survive without looking more like these churches because people can vote with their feet.
I used to be a Pentecostal preacher. You probably know that, to my embarrassment. And at the time, I thought Pentecostalism, of course, I thought it was the true Christian faith, but I thought it was more like a fringe element. Is it still fringy, or is it moving more mainstream?
No, it's been very much mainstreamed, but I think of a lot of American listeners in particular might think of Pentecostals as sort of your oneness, holiness kind of sects that have, that measure women's skirts when they walk into the church and play this incredible music. But it really has changed. And I mean, there's Pentecostal, the word is doing a lot of work in my work. When we're saying Pentecostalism now, we're really referring to the Pentecostal movement as well as the charismatic movement and even parts of the non-denominational movement. So what we're really talking about is churches that are using the Holy Spirit, that are really invested in the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So whether that's speaking in tongues or faith healing and some of the other gifts of the Spirit, what it's really about is not only believing in those gifts, but practicing them. And that's really the hallmark of Pentecostalism. It's actually an incredibly modern religion now, that it is all about being able to use these gifts and make people's lives better in the here and now as well as the ever after.
So what you're saying is that Pentecostalism is going across the different denominations. It isn't just one sect?
Yeah, it's never been one denomination, and this is quite an academic question, and some academics and believers get mad at me. So I do try to not get too into it. So just really say that the Christians who are really defined by the Holy Spirit. But yeah, there is quite a movement now within Christianity to be non-denominational. Basically, that's just you don't want to scare off potential customers, to be a little bit crude about it. So people don't want to say that they're necessarily Pentecostal or Southern Baptists. They just really want to bring everyone into the tent. The most important thing is the focus on the practice, and that really is the Holy Spirit and practicing this power of evangelism, these particular gifts that are helping people in their everyday lives.
So how many Pentecostals are there in the world, by percentage or by numbers?
Yeah, I mean, the official numbers is somewhere around 600 million. I would say that it's getting much higher than that already. You know, we're being conservative in my claim, certainly. And that's out of about 2 billion Christians worldwide. But when you think that in 1980, that number, which, you know, we're talking now 25%, maybe up to a third of global Christians being Pentecostal, that number was 6% in 1980. So that's why I really call it a revolution, because this is huge. I mean, in Brazil now, which everyone thinks of as, you know, the great Catholic country in the world, literally as we speak, Pentecostals are overtaking Catholics in pure numbers in that country. And when you think that Catholicism got there 500 years ago, Pentecostalism got there 40 years ago, that's really huge. And it's having a seismic effect, you know, beyond the church pews.
So you write, Elle, that these rapidly Pentecostalizing societies can be led to a darkly violent place. Now, before we talk about the scary stuff in your book, such as spiritual warfare and so on, could we start with what Pentecostalism is, how it started, and what it professes?
Sure. So the official starting moment or revival is considered the Azusa Street revival in 1906 in downtown Los Angeles. It was started by a guy called William J. Seymour. He was actually the son of freed slaves from Louisiana. And he had left the South because of lynchings and things like that after the Civil War that were going on over land. And he began getting into this outgrowth of what was the Methodist faith at the time, which was a faith that was really particularly focused on healing, and that was, you know, certainly very fringe at the time. His mentor, who I actually think has a better claim to be the founder of it, Charles Fox Parham, was a white man. And when William J. Seymour went to study under him in Houston, because of Jim Crow laws at the time, he had to sit out in the hallway while the white men took instructions inside. But he took on this faith. He was a very pious and a very serious man, and a very good man. I think most people who would read about him would say that he was, you know, more of a Jesus-like figure, and that he was very generous in spirit, very austere, and very much believed in what he was promoting. So when he went to this church in Los Angeles to take over from a pastor who went away, he and his followers wanted these gifts of the Spirit that Charles Fox Parham had said it would be bestowed on them if they, you know, sort of prayed and fasted and went through these rituals that Parham's church had gone through a few years earlier, and people thought that they were speaking Swedish and Chinese when the tongues came upon them. And so this group of people, by and large African American, I believe, you know, all sat there and prayed and fasted for days and days. And then the gifts of the Spirit started coming upon the congregation. People were rolling around. They were slain in the Spirit. They were speaking in tongues. Healing started to come upon them. Prophecy, all of the 9 gifts that were foretold in the Bible. And yeah, it wound up being a huge moment. Primarily, Oh, so if I could just quickly finish that. So why I think it became such a big moment was, it just happened in a big city. I mean, Los Angeles at the time was really booming. But by the time it hit the papers, it was the same day as the San Francisco earthquake. And this is, a lot of people were very steeped in religion at the time and very premillennial and you know, sort of thought, you know, Jesus is coming back at any moment. And they thought that earthquake was it.
Wow.
So the first chapter of your book, it has an unusual title, The Last Vomit of Satan. So what on earth does that mean?
Well, that's just creative license, because I loved that line when I was reading about Seymour's revival, Azusa Street. A British preacher who was quite influential came over to see it, because this, really made headlines around the world. And he witnessed the revival and he was appalled by it. There's probably a fair bit of racism at play, but this was a very different Christian expression. And to this day, some people who are much more conservative don't like the Pentecostal movement for that reason. It's always been very expressive. But he went over to see Seymour and his congregation, and he said, "Yeah, it looks like the last vomit of Satan."
Huh. I remember for a brief time I was in a Pentecostal church, thinking that traditional Christianity was kind of formalistic and dry and ritual, and that we Pentecostals had this true living Holy Spirit of God, and it was more emotional. Do you think Pentecostalism attracts more emotional type of people?
Yes, I mean, whether or not it's emotional, but one of the big draw cards around the world, and I've said this often, that it's the faith of the world's working poor, is that you don't have to be educated or lettered to be a preacher. You just need to have a following. There's no education, there's no hierarchy, and so it often is people who are, very great with a crowd who do this, who are preaching from the gut. It's very successful because it feels more authentic to a lot of people. If you're in the Brazilian favela and there's a mixed race guy who grew up in the same streets as you, who can talk to issues that matter to you, that's more meaningful than a priest who is educated in Spain. And so that really is a big draw card of the movement, is speaking from the gut. But perhaps, as we'll talk about later on, you can hear a lot of echoes of that in the populist right-wing movement that's also going on in the world at the moment. And unfortunately, sometimes these two things tend to collide and join forces.
So do they all speak in tongues and do faith healing and believe in demons and that we're living in the end times? And are they all obsessed with enemies?
Yeah, I mean, the way that most Pentecostals would say it is that we're in the days of God's advancing kingdom. And so, they believe that, the trials and tribulations have probably happened. They often point to things like the Holocaust. And so now it's just, getting everything in order. It's why the building of, why moving the US Embassy in Jerusalem was such a big deal. I think at one point, Trump even said, in a speech to Jewish people or to Israeli people, the Christians care about this more than you guys do. Because that was seen as quite a seismic thing in the Christian world. But it's very much is about seeing the world in a spiritual conception, in battles of good and evil, in things that go wrong as being enemies punishing you. In terms of speaking in tongues, that's definitely going out of fashion. Some people like to sort of do it as part of getting sort of in a trance or getting caught in the moment. But the initial tongues thing in the 1900s really was people who legitimately thought they were speaking in Chinese, and a lot of them hopped off on boats to China and then got there, didn't speak a word of it, and died of dysentery and other horrible things. So yeah, it just doesn't have the effect anymore. But what people are really going to Pentecostalism for and converting from other faiths quite prominently for is health and wealth. So it's those gifts of the Spirit in terms of prosperity, in terms of faith healing, that's really getting people in the tent.
Gee, that's not very good for their health if they're really sick.
I like your book because not only do you go into the history of Pentecostalism, but you also go into the global picture of it. And you've written in your book, like a magnet pulling iron filings, Pentecostalism is becoming the authentic representation of Christianity in the world today. So why, to the point where you say it's going to be the dominant faith in the world? Why is that?
I think there's certainly an argument that it is the most dominant expression right now, that it's the thing that most people associate with Christianity. I mean, I suppose the other great rival is the Vatican, and that beautiful building with all its beautiful art and its history. But how many people still associate that with their faith now? I just don't see it. I think Pentecostalism, with its focus on health and wealth, with its ability to speak to people in different contexts, to be fairly syncretic, to look and feel like the local culture, and those practices of the Holy Spirit, I do believe that it's the dominant expression of Christianity in the world today now.
But I wonder if it's really taking off more in poor parts of the world where people don't have health care. Because faith
Yeah.
healing is not health care.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also things like medical clinics, which churches often run, and that's the only services people are getting. A big part of my book is really that that churches are the only game in town in a lot of places, and they're essentially becoming parastate institutions. But I mean, in the United States, a lot of people don't have healthcare. I've just been working on a story at the moment down in Arizona, where a lot of people are turning to a form of spiritual warfare because they can't afford their medications and they can't afford healthcare. So it certainly is, yeah. Some people need to have faith because they can't afford not to. But there are also those are very real material considerations. But it also can't be lost that these they're true believers. People do believe in this, certainly.
Well, you've written that it's not just about saving souls in this church or this movement, but it has an agenda to control politics and transform society. So we want to talk a lot more about that in the next segment, about culture wars and how social media is helping to promote Pentecostalism.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
We are speaking with the author and journalist Elle Hardy about her new book, Beyond Belief: How Pentecostal Christianity is Taking Over the World. So, it's the dangerous stuff, Elle. You say that Pentecostalism is preaching spiritual warfare and they're preaching against the enemy. And you write that these modern prophets embedded in our institutions, they have the cash and the influence to wage what they would call a holy war. Is Pentecostalism dangerous?
There are certainly dangerous elements and some dangerous people in the movement, I would say. I don't know if I'd want to demonize the whole movement, but certainly when you do talk in those terms, I mean, we've seen enough genocides and whatnot over the last 100 years that when you start demonizing and dehumanizing your enemies, that can lead to some pretty nasty stuff. And I don't use these terms lightly. The penultimate chapter in my book, which means the most to me, is about Guatemala, which knows a lot about bloody civil wars and genocides. And what we're starting to see there now is sort of a long tail emerge, or a sort of pressing on the exposed nerve in the country, where some traditional priests and healers in the country are being targeted for assassination by Pentecostal and Pentecostally inspired groups. They long had an accommodation with the Catholics in the country, and there was a fairly syncretic form of Mayan Catholicism. But now Pentecostals have moved in the last few decades and said, no, this is witchcraft. And it's cost several, and probably scores, in fact, of traditional priests and healers their lives. And there's one there's one murder of one particularly horrific assassination that I write about in the book.
By traditional priests, you mean the local indigenous religions?
Yeah, the Mayan faith.
One of your chapters is titled "The Bigger the Prophecy, the Bigger the Pocket." And I believe there you were writing about South Africa. What happened there?
Yeah, I'm glad you like my chapter titles, because that was one of the few fun things when you get to the end of writing a book and you're very frazzled. So thank you. So yeah, that was actually an expression that someone mentioned to me in South Africa. But there's a really fascinating phenomenon going on there of these what I call millennial showman preachers. There's a lot of young guys and this goes back to some of the stuff that we spoke about earlier, but there's a lot of young preachers who are in the post-1994 generation who, everything has gone wrong in the country now. It's completely falling to bits at the moment. And, they've it's kind of a giant middle finger to everything that's been going on. And once again, it's, faith is the only thing for people left to believe in. What everything that they've tried, sort of radical democracy, austerity, all of these things have just, wound up ending up in corruption, and the same people getting richer and richer all of the time. And so they're practicing what one guy, one preacher, Penuel Nguini, has called the Church of Horror. So they are actually actively practicing theatrics as kind of an FU to society. And, they're doing things like turning petrol into pineapple. And so the congregations are drinking petrol as a form of communion, eating live snakes, doing some pretty horrific things. And it sort of all culminated in 2019. There's a very viral clip of a preacher called Elle Hardy, who resurrected a man, a very clearly alive man from the dead in a casket. And it looked extremely comical, but there is something very big going on there, and it's about making these outlandish promises, again, because this is the only thing that people have left to believe in. And these churches are, once again, forming those parastate institutions. They're the only places where a lot of people can get a bit of healthcare, whether it's by way of miracle or by, a small clinic on site at their church. These are also, social solidarity networks. People at churches, at least, might look out for each other, go to each other's businesses, help, when you're working 3 jobs, help, look after your kids, and those sorts of things. So there is really something about what churches are giving people that, where the states and where secular institutions have failed.
Well, or just the secular institutions maybe haven't been started. They've come out of theocracies already, or autocracies. But is Pentecostalism strong everywhere, or only in certain Christian-dominated countries? And what about the United States?
Wherever there's Christianity, Pentecostalism is growing, is the easiest way to put it. It's very prominent in sub-Saharan Africa, both by conversion and just by pure birth rate. And similarly, in Latin America, they're massively converting Catholics, but also there's a higher birth rate. But in the United States, I was just looking up the numbers recently, it's estimated there's about 100 million evangelicals in the US. Pretty much bang on 2/3 of those, so about 65 million, are said to be Pentecostal or charismatic now, or something, sort of generally in that Holy Spirit tent that we spoke about earlier. So it's certainly very significant and growing.
But it's about 75 million Americans today identify as nuns. Not necessarily atheists or agnostics, but at least nothing in particular. So one piece of good news in your book is that the truly great rival, as you say, to Pentecostalism is the rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. And of course, that's what really matters to us here at Freethought Matters, to promote the rise of the nuns. So is the future going to be a face-off between the nuns and the Pentecostals?
I think it very much is, and this is part of the political dimension that I speak of in the book, and why we're seeing a lot of the coming together with Pentecostal groups and, the new sort of radical right that we see in people like Trump and Bolsonaro and others. And a big part of it is that really fermenting political expression of Pentecostalism really is in that feeling besieged by the secular liberal world around them. And it probably is the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, who very much typify that, people that don't have any belief, but they know that they probably don't really like what those guys are up to. And my friend Ryan Burge has actually written a great book on that. I'm not sure if you guys have spoken to him, and he's really great.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. He's really great on the stats and everything of it. And I think, just the pure acceleration of numbers into the nuns, probably, I think just in terms of percentages, it outstrips what the Pentecostals are doing. But yeah, I mean, when you see people who are very, very connected to their faith, and people who are, not militant atheists, but very much know that they don't want that, when they're becoming two of the real dominant groups in the United States with similar numbers. I think there certainly will be sort of more clashes and more, I don't really like the term, but, tribalism. We're very much just seeing a just complete split in values and beliefs in people in the United States and elsewhere.
So we have just about a minute left here. You seem to suggest in your book that there's an inherent contradiction. On the one hand, Pentecostalism is a very personal, private, Holy Spirit faith. But on the other hand, it's also politicized to try to change society. Is that a contradiction?
I don't think so, because I think so much of it is Pentecostal's ability to speak to people's material needs. And again, I don't want to downplay, because these are true believers and who do believe in the spiritual stuff. But what Pentecostalism is doing is speaking to people's needs in the here and now. So there's material needs such as healthcare and wealth and just getting your life together. And there is a lot of evidence that people's lives do tend to improve once they join Pentecostal churches, when they're in those really much lower socioeconomic demographics. But there's also, it's just speaking to what people want in their faith, to be expressive, to kind of do what you want, not to have to sit there and have Reverend Lovejoy preach at you, to have someone talk to you in a very meaningful sermon and then get on with your day. So yeah, I think it has that very profound personal effect that also there's a lot of crossover with the political.
Or is it just pie in the sky that they're offering, Elle? The prosperity gospel doesn't really help the typical congregant.
Yeah, the prosperity gospel, very few people are actually preaching that with a straight face anymore. There's some pretty strong evidence out of Brazil that people's lives get together and they see an improvement in the circumstances when they join a church, because often that comes with stopping drinking and maybe starting a small business and moving into this solidarity network and things like that. So there just is something about churches that are giving people a way of getting their life together and giving them more meaning in their lives that seem to help them.
Well, thank you, Elle, for writing the book, Beyond Belief, How Pentecostal Christianity is Taking Over the World. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you so much for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.